In the readings today, all three readings, we have a variety of visions. In that first reading, you remember from the widow of Zarephath, who Elijah was living with, she immediately assumed as her son gets sick and then dies, that it's because of her guilt. You remember what she says to Elijah? "You've come to condemn me for my guilt." Or it's similar to those words. "Why have you come, man of God?" It is an entirely natural, even though we're talking about an event 2,500 years ago, it could be today. In fact, I told this story at the Mass, 7:30 Mass, and someone outside of Mass was telling me that a friend of his, their child is in utero, very touchy whether the child will live. And immediately he said that his friend said God is condemning him. Just like this woman, right? As she, humanly speaking, when a disaster happens to us, we revert to perhaps a more primitive vision of who God is. That God's keeping an account, He's waiting for us to trip, or He's gonna even the score, so to speak, in the end. It's kind of, I guess we learned feeling in kindergarten. You have to pay for things. It isn't the God that Elijah worshipped, and it certainly wasn't the God that represented by Jesus, but it is our reaction. Well, if I got this cancer, if I lost my job, I'm being punished. It's the first. I won't make a poll how many people have thought that in their own life when something terrible or tragic happens. It's understandable. It's not true, but it's understandable. And Elijah, even Elijah, you can see in that dialogue, if you reread it, he's like, "God, why are you doing?" Even Elijah is kind of bought into this. "God, you gotta make this right. This isn't your name is going to be messed up." Now in the gospel, clearly it's a different story, but the same result, right? I mean, the way this story of the raising of from the dead of this man is only in the Gospel of Luke. So, and the way Luke tells it, it's different from a lot of miracle stories in this regard, that often in a miracle story there's a kind of an element of faith. You remember that story that Mark tells, Luke 2, but the man who had what seemed to be an epileptic boy. You remember that story? The boy fell in the fire, fell in the water, and etc. And the disciples could not heal him, and so and he says, "If you can do it," and Jesus' reaction is, "If I can do it, have faith." He says, "Oh, I do believe, but help my unbelief." So there's often a dialogue, or at least some expression of faith. In this regard, there is no expression of faith, right? From the way Luke tells it, Jesus is coming to this town. He sees a funeral coming out of the town. He sees the result that the son is dead, and the only son of a widow. And he responds. It tells him that he's just filled with compassion. He just reacts and just raises that man from the dead. And so we say, wow, no faith, just action. This is more the picture of Jesus, of God who is. What does God want for us, really? Does He want to even the score? Why would He bother, Creator of the universe, right? I mean, He's got it. If God is who's God, if even the score, why would He bother? Just have the sun explode and take care of it. I mean, this isn't who Jesus represented God to be. God is like, I guess, your parents, or like the best part of us as parents. I mean, sometimes we get worn out, perhaps. But what do you want from these children? You want them to do what the best for them, right? You want them to grow. You want them to be independent. repentant. You want him to love. You want him to be a decent human being, right? And maybe you want him to go to Harvard too. But the basic things, you want these. And God, to the nth degree, wants that for us. He wants us on fire for who we were meant to be. Did you hear in the second reading when Paul is talking about his conversion? Even though he was wrong-headed and he was a persecutor of the church, he went his own way. He believes that God had a plan for him from the womb, that God had set him aside. In other words, he went the wrong way, right? He went in a violently self-righteous, condemnatory way against the very truth that he would later understand who God was, right? He was part of that. So, but he never doubted that God had always wanted to pull him out of his self-righteousness, pull him out of his violence, put him on the right path. That's the God that he believed in. It's the God that Jesus represents. What's the plan? God wants us to be who we were meant to be from the moment of our conception. He wants us to be on fire with love, forgiveness. He wants us to know the salvation of God. We can be like, many times we are like Paul, at least in his early life. We head down a dead end. We stay up all night watching pornography. We drink ourselves to oblivion. We go after money. We use people. There's a minute you can fill in the blank. The dead ends that we get into, that Paul got into, and that we can get into. But that isn't God's will for us. He's not keeping it count. He wants us to be on fire for His love. He wants us to live a different way. He wants us transformed. That's the true God. The primitive God that the widow at Zarephath, I guess when the doctor says you got cancer and you're going to die, you're going to think, I should have stopped smoking. God's punishment or something. Fine. Don't leave it there. Don't leave it there, because that isn't the truth. You can beat yourself up if you want, but that isn't the truth about God. That isn't who God is. God has a plan for me, and He has a plan for you, and He has a plan for this little girl and this little boy, and it is to be fully alive in His love. Fully alive in His love. So, let us take what God is offering, and let us live differently. Okay, parents and godparents, please stand.